They didn't even knock. The sky split open one morning over Siberia. Not with a bang, not with a blaze of glory, but with silence. No sound. No warning. Just 100-mile-wide ship sliding through the clouds like a knife through soft skin. The world stopped. At first, people thought it was a satellite gone wrong, or some billionaire's insane space toy finally crashing back to Earth. Then the ship moved. Slow, deliberate, steady, like it didn't care about us. Like it had already won something we didn't even know we were part of. 10 minutes later, every screen on Earth, from bedroom TVs to military satellites, flashed the same message in perfect English. This planet is now under jurisdiction of the Galactic Order. Surrender is non-negotiable. No explanation, no talks, no diplomacy, just that. The UN scrambled like a kicked anthill. News anchors choked on their scripts. Military leaders tried to figure out if it was a prank or the start of the end. People rioted, prayed. Some even cheered, like we'd finally get answers about the universe. But most of us? We were just stunned. Then came the second message, broadcast only to the world's military channels. But it got leaked. Of course it did. Some low-level comms tech in a bunker somewhere uploaded the full thing to the dark web an hour later, and that was the spark. Resistance will result in species-wide disarmament. Non-compliance will lead to planetary deactivation. Planetary deactivation. That was their version of, "We'll glass your world." They thought we'd kneel. Maybe they had good reason. The Galactic Order, as we found out later, had subjugated 43 other species before us. Advanced, ancient, proud civilizations, bent into obedience. Earth was just next in line. But there was one thing they didn't understand. We aren't logical creatures. We're stubborn, emotional, angry little bastards. You tell most people they're going to die, and they'll cry. You tell a human he has to bow down, and he'll spit in your eye before the first punch even lands. And some humans, some like Colonel Brandt, they don't know how to lose, not even when it's hopeless. Brandt was ex-Special Forces, dishonorably discharged after leading an unauthorized raid during a civil war in Southeast Asia. He lost men, took the fall, spent 5 years rotting in a Texas prison, forgotten by the country he bled for. The day the order arrived, Brandt was mopping a cafeteria floor behind bars. 2 days later, he was sitting in a shadow-black room under a mountain in Colorado, listening to a 3-star general ask one question. If we're going to fight gods, how do we hurt them? Brandt didn't smile. He didn't even blink. We remind them what monsters made us. That was the moment Earth changed. While politicians begged for negotiations and civilians screamed on the streets, a few men went dark. Off the books, underground. The old kind of war, the kind where nothing's clean and no rule matters more than survival. They called it Project Ashfall. No fleets, no fancy starships, just small cells of operators, scientists, and hackers tasked with one thing: figure out how to punch back. Hard. And while the world braced for peace talks, the first alien blood was spilled in the Mojave Desert. Burned metal, scattered limbs, and one encrypted recording from Brandt himself, broadcast to every colony and ship in the Order's fleet. You want surrender? You're looking at the wrong species. They called it a civilized occupation. That's what the Galactic Order's High Representative said during the first open transmission with Earth's leaders. A towering, 6-limbed thing named Halek Tor, covered in a metallic sheen that looked like armor but moved like skin. He didn't blink, didn't pause, just laid out their version of peace like a bored accountant reading from a report. Your culture will be preserved in archives. Your population will be maintained within regulated habitats. Your planet will serve as a biological reserve, and your resources will be extracted to benefit the greater unity of the stars. preserved, maintained, regulated, like we were pets or exhibits in a galactic zoo. World leaders tried to reason with him. The President of the United States, the Premier of China, the Chancellor of Germany, all of them speaking calmly, clearly, respectfully. Halleck Tor didn't even respond. He just ended the transmission. That's when the order started what they called compliance tests. They picked 5 cities across the globe and sent down probes, oval things the size of tanks, floating silently. Each carried a weapon that wasn't supposed to kill. Just disable. Paralyze. Remind us who was in charge. They dropped one in Johannesburg, another in Buenos Aires, one in Tokyo, another in Cairo, and the last, right in the heart of Chicago. Within 5 minutes, every piece of electronics in those cities shut off. Cars crashed, planes dropped out of the sky, power grids collapsed. People screamed as their pacemakers failed, as elevators stopped mid-floor, as life itself hit pause. It was like God had flipped a switch. Then came the pulse, not an explosion, just a wave, pure energy, invisible but unstoppable. It hit flesh like a sledgehammer. People dropped in the streets, some twitched, others froze. Most just collapsed, wide-eyed and helpless, paralyzed but alive. The message was simple. This is mercy. The alternative is extinction. But they made one mistake. They thought we'd see that and submit. They thought we'd take the hit, swallow our pride, and bow. What they didn't realize is that in every country, in every neighborhood, in every back alley and battlefield, there are people who live for the fight. People who've been beaten their whole lives, but never learned how to break. Men like Ramon Alvarez, a South Side mechanic who watched his brother collapse in the street while the skies burned over Chicago. Men like Andrei Vasilenko, a Russian boxer turned smuggler who'd lost half his hearing in a prison brawl and felt nothing but rage when the lights went out in Moscow. And of course, Colonel Brandt. He watched the tests unfold from a command bunker in Alaska, the only place left untouched because of a shielded experimental AI network buried beneath the permafrost. He didn't scream, didn't cry, just stood there in silence, arms folded, jaw locked. Chicago was a message, one of the scientists muttered, his voice shaking. A warning. Brandt nodded. Then we'll send one back. He turned to the table. Spread out across it were hard drives, old maps, coded flash drives, blueprints of tech stolen from alien wreckage. All of it slapped together in a week by desperate minds working in freezing silence. "What do you need?" the general asked. Brandt didn't hesitate. 5 men, 1 nuke, and a way to get it off this rock. The general blinked. "That's suicide." Brandt's voice didn't rise, didn't even flinch. "No, that's war." 3 weeks later, Earth got its first taste of revenge. The order had set up a command relay above the Pacific, a floating station the size of Manhattan, hovering 10 miles up, cloaked in energy fields that bent radar and deflected satellites. It was the nerve center for their planetary control. But what the order didn't know was that human stubbornness isn't just emotional, it's tactical. We adapt, we improvise, and when backed into a corner, we get creative with our hate. Brandt's team was dubbed Ghost Unit, all of them off the books, dead on paper. Every one of them had either a death sentence, a dishonorable discharge, or a medical condition that would have gotten them rejected from any sane mission. But sanity had no place in this war. There was Parker, the ex-Navy engineer who used to dismantle ICBMs for fun. Griggs, a Marine sniper who once held off a Taliban force for 39 hours with 1 eye and a shattered knee. Tanaka, a hacker out of Hong Kong who'd fried his own fingerprints to disappear. Macon, a demolitions expert who blew up a cartel base with kitchen bleach and a toothpick bomb. And then there was Malik. Brant didn't like him. Too young, too cocky. But the kid knew the Order's tech better than anyone alive. He'd spent years scraping alien broadcasts off deep space signals. Even before the invasion, he was crazy, but he was useful. They called him the cockroach, because no matter what you threw at him, he survived. Ghost Unit didn't launch in a shuttle. They didn't have one. Instead, they stole a cargo pod from a mining facility in New Zealand, retrofitted it with pulse dampeners, and duct-taped it to the back of a decommissioned Russian missile. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't safe. But it worked. They launched during a thunderstorm. The Order's sensors were blinded by atmospheric static. The pod shot up, broke through clouds, and coasted toward the station like debris from a weather satellite. And then they hit it. The station didn't even realize what was happening until the hull was breached. The first alien they saw screamed in something that sounded like metal grinding on bone. Griggs shot it twice. It didn't scream again. They planted the nuke at the core of the relay hub, rigged it to a pressure switch connected to Brant's pulse. He stayed behind. The others exfiltrated in stolen escape pods, screaming through the atmosphere like meteors. When the Order tried to recapture the relay, they found Brant sitting there, one hand on his chest, the other holding a human cigarette. He said nothing, just smiled. And then the station exploded. The blast lit up the night sky from Tokyo to Los Angeles. People cheered, cried, fell to their knees. The Order called it a terrorist act, said humanity had crossed a line. That peace was no longer on the table. But we didn't care. Because for the first time in history, the whole world felt like one nation. Not one under a flag. One under fire. A new broadcast went live from a bunker in Iceland, short, brutal, and raw. A woman's voice, strong, steady, the only surviving member of the UN Council brave enough to speak freely. We are not property. We are not subjects. We are human. And if that means extinction, then let it be written in blood across your stars. The war had begun, and Earth was ready to burn everything to make them regret ever coming here. The retaliation was fast. Barely 24 hours after the relay station over the Pacific exploded, the Order struck back, not with diplomacy, not with another warning, but with fire. They burned Rio. It started with a sharp whine that pulsed through every radio frequency from South America to the tip of Africa. Dogs screamed. Birds dropped mid-flight. People clutched their ears as static poured out of every device, even the ones powered off. And then it came from the sky. 3 long, black ships, shaped like blades, cut through the clouds like they were silk. No noise, no light, just movement, fast, sleek, surgical. They hovered above the city like vultures over a dying animal. And then they opened. Not bombs, not lasers, just light. Blue, white, searing light that poured down in beams, sweeping across streets and buildings like searchlights from hell. Wherever the beams hit, matter unraveled. Not exploded, disintegrated. Turned into ash in real time. People ran, but it didn't matter. The beams didn't chase. They didn't need to. They just passed through. By the time it was done, 1/3 of the city was gone. Flattened, vaporized. No survivors, no resistance, no explanation. The Order left the wreckage untouched. No aid, no messages, no cleanup. Just silence. The message was clear. This is what happens when you say no. For a few days, Earth reeled. Even the toughest resistance cells went quiet. People who had cheered during the orbital station bombing now sat in basements, gripping rifles they barely knew how to use. Mothers buried their children in rubble. Fathers made promises to ghosts. There were no heroes, no speeches, only rage. And Brant, he wasn't dead. He had been pulled from the wreckage of the relay station by a salvage drone the Resistance had snuck into the orbital debris field days earlier. Burned, broken, barely breathing, but alive. They patched him up in an underground facility in Finland. Nothing fancy, just morphine, bandages, and a surgeon who used to work with insurgents in the Middle East. The man's hands shook. Not from fear, but because there was no anesthesia left. Brandt didn't scream. Not once. "Keep going," he muttered through blood-stained teeth. When it was over, the surgeon said, "You should have died." Brandt just stared at him. Not yet. The Resistance fractured after Rio. Some groups wanted to go underground, scatter, lay low until the order got bored or moved on. Others wanted to negotiate, talk, surrender if it meant surviving. But one group, small, ruthless, led by men like Griggs, Macon, and Tanaka, refused to back down. They called themselves the Scourge. No flags, no rules, just one mission: make the order bleed. They weren't interested in big wins or symbolic gestures. They hit supply convoys, sabotaged terraforming sites, hacked minor relay points, and replaced public broadcasts with footage of Rio's aftermath set to heavy metal. And worse, they started hunting aliens on the ground. The Order had stationed thousands of peace units across the planet. Genetically engineered soldiers, each grown in vats, each fused with armor that responded to brainwaves. They stood over 7 feet tall, didn't speak, didn't sleep, didn't bleed the way humans did. But they could die. The first one fell in Bulgaria. Ambushed in a mountain pass, took 4 hours, 2 IEDs, and a homemade railgun built by a teenager with a grudge. They didn't even bother hiding the body, just tied it to a tree with a sign. "We don't bow." After that, the Order started sending squads instead of individuals. Didn't help. The Scourge adapted. They used traps, terrain, psychological warfare. They poisoned alien rations with bacteria cultures that didn't exist in the Order's databases. They played recorded screams of their fallen in looped frequencies that drove alien soldiers mad. They sniped the ones who hesitated, tortured the ones who didn't. It got ugly fast, and the people loved it. Videos leaked online. Blurry, brutal footage of humans taking back the fight. Alien carcasses strung up in abandoned cities. Human warriors screaming victory over piles of corpses. The Resistance had turned into something darker. Something primal. They weren't fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for revenge. Brandt knew it wouldn't last. "Emotion burns fast," he said to Parker, watching one of the broadcasts from a bombed-out safe house in Greenland. "We need something stronger." "Like what?" Parker asked. "Hope?" "No," Brandt muttered. "Hatred." He didn't mean it lightly. He meant it the way soldiers mean the smell of gunpowder, the way addicts mean the needle, something that stays in your bones even when everything else is gone. Hope fades. Hatred keeps you sharp. That's when he laid out the plan. Operation Glass Eye. Simple idea. Insane execution. The Order had a command satellite in high orbit, nicknamed the Watcher. It tracked heat signatures, quantum pulses, even neural activity. It saw everything. Every campfire, every scream, every movement. It needed to go blind. They didn't have a ship fast enough to reach it. So they turned to an old friend. Gravity. There was a decommissioned kinetic satellite launcher buried in the Arizona desert. A relic from a scrapped Cold War-era weapons program. It was built to shoot tungsten rods from low orbit onto enemy soil with the force of small nukes. Project nickname, Rods from God. But they didn't need to shoot down. They needed to shoot up. Tanaka rewired the guidance system. Macon replaced the launch rods with a massive steel payload filled with raw uranium and a destabilized fusion core stolen from a mining operation. They turned the damn thing into a cannon. When they launched it, the Order barely reacted. The projectile moved slow, too slow to be seen as a threat. Until it wasn't. By the time the Watcher realized it, the payload had reached terminal velocity, and unlike missiles or ships, it didn't have a signal, no tracking, no engine, just mass, speed, and purpose. The Watcher blinked out of existence in an instant. 1 second, the eye of the Order was watching Earth. The next, blind. The cheering was global. Even people who'd given up before now roared into the night. Churches rang bells, mosques sang louder, armies, scattered, splintered, half-starved, rallied for the first time under a single thought. We can win. But not everyone was cheering. In orbit, aboard the Judicator-class warship Kethvar, Halektor watched the destruction of the Watcher with a still face. Behind him stood his second-in-command, a younger, more impulsive creature named Valsek. "We underestimated them," Valsek growled. Halektor didn't look away from the screen. "No, we misjudged their culture. Their weakness is not cowardice." "Then what is it?" Halektor turned slowly. "Memory," Valsek frowned. "They remember pain, loss, betrayal. They carry it with them, like weapons." He walked forward, voice cold. "We have made a mistake." "What shall we do?" Halektor paused. Then he said one word. "Cleanse." Earth didn't know it yet, but the next phase had begun. The Order wasn't going to send warnings anymore. No more compliance tests, no more announcements. The new directive was extermination, and the first sign of it came not in fire, but in silence. Entire towns in Eastern Europe went dark overnight. No broadcasts, no bodies, just vanished, like they were erased. Resistance cells sent scouts, but none came back. Even drones failed to return. Then came the black rain. It fell in India first. Oily, thick, carried on clouds that hadn't been there an hour before. People who touched it began to cough, then vomit, then scream. The air smelled of copper and ozone, like something was wrong with the sky. The Order had started using bioweapons, things humanity had no name for. The Scourge fought harder than ever. But now, it wasn't just about killing aliens. It was about protecting what was left. Civilians, kids, pregnant women hiding in subway stations, old men clutching rusted rifles, guarding water tanks like they were sacred altars. Every street became a trench, every home a fortress. And somewhere beneath a frozen bunker in Iceland, Brandt watched it unfold with dead eyes. He didn't cry. He didn't flinch. He just reached for the map. There was one last move they hadn't tried. And it wasn't defense, it wasn't resistance, it was offense. The kind that would make the whole galaxy remember exactly what Earth really was. Not a world, not a civilization, but a graveyard waiting to be filled. There's a part of the human brain that only turns on when it knows there's nothing left to lose. That's the part Colonel Brandt had been waiting for. He watched it come alive in real time, in the eyes of resistance fighters holding broken guns, in starving men planting IEDs with trembling fingers, in dying women shielding their children with bloodied hands. Not a single one asked for mercy. Not a single one cried for peace. They didn't want a treaty. They wanted payback. And Brandt? He was going to give it to them. The world's population had dropped by 17% in 2 months. Not because of war, because of silence. Whole cities went off the grid. Entire countries lost contact. The Order wasn't bombing anymore. They were erasing, cleansing. In the northern provinces of Canada, where the cold made it harder for alien tech to stabilize, a group of refugees stumbled onto what the Order left behind after processing a town. There were no bodies, just a pit. 70 feet wide. Perfectly round, lined with black crystal that vibrated when you stood near it. It hummed. Not like a machine, but like something alive, something waiting. They dropped a camera into it. No bottom, just dark. That footage never made it to the mainstream channels. Brant made sure of it, not because he wanted to hide the truth, but because showing it would have killed hope. And humanity didn't need truth anymore. It needed rage. The offensive plan was simple in concept and damn near impossible in execution. Take the war off Earth. We keep playing defense. We lose, Brant said to the remaining Resistance Council. What was left of the UN, NATO, and rogue military cells that still answered to something resembling command. We punch them in the face, they wipe out cities. But if we punch them in the gut, deep, where it hurts, they bleed. Parker raised a brow. You mean space? Brant nodded. We don't wait for the next blast from orbit. We go up there, into their backyard, into their supply lines, their refueling depots, their research ships. We cripple their logistics, starve them out, humiliate them, make them feel fear. Macon grunted. With what ships? We barely have working trucks. Brant turned and nodded at the screen. On it was an image of the K9 orbiter, a secret deep space mining rig Earth had launched 5 years before the invasion. Supposedly lost to budget cuts and silence, but it hadn't been lost. It had just gone dark, run by AI, self-repairing, built for autonomy. And it was still out there, floating in a silent asteroid belt, abandoned, until now. They called the mission Skyfire. Step 1, reach the K9 orbiter. Step 2, retrofit it into a warship. Step 3, take the fight to space. It was suicide. But they'd stopped caring about survival. The K9 wasn't designed for war, but it was built tough, armored against radiation, fitted with industrial-grade cutting lasers, and powered by a fusion core that could level a city if it went critical. It was exactly what they needed. A blunt weapon with reach. The problem? Getting there. They didn't have rockets, not working ones. What they had were scraps, leftover cargo vessels, weather balloons, atmospheric thrusters, and one barely operational launch tube that had been condemned by NASA a decade ago. It took 2 weeks of non-stop, sleepless engineering to Frankenstein it all together. They called the craft Widow 1. It looked like hell. A coffin with engines, no shields, no landing gear, just thrusters, oxygen tanks, and a shell of reinforced hull, enough to get 4 men into orbit. Maybe. And Brant was going to be one of them. The launch was unceremonious. No countdown, no flags. Just a cold morning, 4 suits climbing into the tight shell of Widow 1, and a cracked radio whispering a countdown that ended with nothing but fire. The force nearly killed them. Widow 1 shook like it was possessed. Screws rattled loose. A pipe burst mid-ascent. Parker blacked out from G-forces. Macon threw up in his helmet. But it worked. They broke through. And then, for the first time since the invasion, they were off the Earth. No sounds, no orders. Just silence and the void. The K9 orbiter came into view like a drifting ghost. Huge, ugly, covered in asteroid dust. Its lights were dead, its signal cold. But when they docked and rebooted the core, it hummed to life, and it welcomed them. Status: mining operation halted, awaiting directive. Parker grinned. New directive, K9, Brant said. We're going to start a goddamn war. Retrofitting the K9 wasn't pretty. They had limited tools, 0 instructions, and no backup. But they had hatred. And hatred builds. They turned the mining lasers into focused plasma cannons, reinforced the hull with scrap metal from destroyed alien drones, converted the mineral storage bay into a weapons bay, packed it with explosives, EMP grenades, and makeshift boarding pods. Tanaka hacked the AI. made it aggressive, unpredictable. "This thing isn't a ship anymore," he muttered. "It's a knife." Brant nodded. "Then let's stab something." Their first target was a refueling skiff, a floating platform tethered to a gas giant, where the Order siphoned hydrogen and processed it for interstellar use. It wasn't heavily guarded, because they didn't expect Earth to have anything in space. That was their mistake. K9 approached silent and cloaked in space dust. When they breached the skiff's hull, the Order guards inside weren't soldiers. They were workers. Scientists. Brant didn't care. He gunned them down like they weren't even there. Left one alive, just one, to carry the message back. He carved it into the skiff's inner wall before detonating the reactor. "We are coming." It took 3 weeks for the Order to figure out what was happening. 3 refueling stations gone. 2 research ships boarded, stripped, and blown up. 1 diplomatic shuttle hijacked and sent crashing into a gravity well. And then the K9 disappeared again. Back into silence. Back into the asteroid field. They were ghosts, but loud ones. For every place the Order touched Earth, the K9 hit them in orbit. It was asymmetric war, and it was working. The Order adapted. They started arming civilian stations, doubling patrols, deploying hunter ships with advanced AI tracking. For a while, the K9 dodged them all. Until they didn't. The ambush happened outside Titan's orbit. 3 interceptors. Fast. Mean. Each with plasma railguns that could slice a freighter in half. The K9 held its own. Parker took the helm, maneuvered through debris fields like he was playing a game. Macon manned the guns, screaming obscenities every time he blew a ship apart. Tanaka kept the AI from glitching out under pressure, but it was Brant who made the final call. They took 1 hit too many. Reactor leaking. Hull breached. Oxygen thinning. They had 1 chance. He rerouted all power to the engines, lined up the K9 with the biggest interceptor and punched it. A suicide run. At the last second, Tanaka and Parker escaped in the pods. Macon refused. "I don't run." Brant nodded, then looked back one last time at Earth. Just a small dot in the black. "Let's show them what a dead man can do." The K9 hit the interceptor at full burn. The collision ruptured the ship's core, triggered a chain reaction, and turned the sector into a floating graveyard. The explosion was so massive, it was visible from the Martian colony ruins. And the Order? They finally understood something. Humans didn't want peace. They wanted the war they were promised. Tanaka's pod was recovered by a rogue resistance ship orbiting Mars. Parker's landed in the Sahara, half dead, bones shattered. But they lived. And they carried the story. Colonel Brant, Macon, the K9, the first humans to strike space and make the galaxy feel fear. Their names were burned into every resistance camp wall, every underground base, every rebel broadcast. And when a child asked their mother, "What happens if the aliens come back?" the answer was always the same. Then we showed them what Brant showed them. The explosion over Titan's orbit was seen from every corner of the solar system that still had eyes to look. The K9 was gone. Brant and Macon were dust, and with them, humanity's first ship of war had died screaming into the stars. But legends don't end. They mutate. They spread like wildfire, and that's exactly what Brant's sacrifice did. It ignited the last phase of Earth's transformation. From survivor to executioner. Parker's body was broken when they pulled him from the Sahara. The pod had slammed into the desert at terminal velocity, bounced, and carved a trench through the sand like a meteor. His ribs were crushed, both legs shattered, left eye gone. He should have died. But men like Parker don't die on schedule. They put him back together in a shipping container rigged into a trauma unit behind enemy lines. The doc said he'd never walk again. Parker just stared at him, jaw wired shut, eyes dead. When they finally removed the restraints, he dragged himself across the floor, stood against a steel wall using a crutch made from a broken rifle, and said only one thing. "We finish what Brant started." The death of the K-9 didn't break the resistance, it radicalized it. Across the world, groups that had once fought in isolation now formed networks. Underground railways of supplies, weapon smuggling routes through destroyed cities, even rogue satellites reactivated to relay encrypted messages between bunkers buried deep beneath the earth. And the name on everyone's lips? Project Widow's Teeth. It was Tanaka's idea. The hacker who once fried his own ID to escape the system was now the architect of Earth's most dangerous weapon. If the Order wanted extermination, Earth would give them a funeral pyre. Widow's Teeth wasn't a ship. It wasn't a fleet. It wasn't a satellite or a weapon or a drone swarm. It was many things, duct-taped together in the darkness of Earth's dying breath. The core was the Ark, a half-finished deep-sea mining vessel that had been left in Antarctica after budget collapse. Its hull was pressure-sealed, fusion-powered, and hard to track by orbital sensors. Tanaka had converted it into a stealth war hub. On board, 5 nuclear cores, 1,000 EMP rounds, chemical weapons banned under every treaty known to man, and something worse, the Fang Protocol. They never said what it was. Even most resistance fighters didn't know. All they were told was this: when Widow's Teeth opens its mouth, the galaxy's going to choke on blood. Meanwhile, the Order bled. They couldn't control Earth anymore, not fully. Every outpost was under siege. Every relay hacked, every drone intercepted. They tried to pull in reinforcements from the nearest systems, but the convoys kept disappearing. Whole fleets lost in dark space. Because Parker wasn't done. He couldn't fight like before, could barely walk. But his mind? Still razor sharp. He became the general, the ghost in the machine, commanding from deep underground. Voice sharp, cold, without even a flicker of hope. He wasn't leading for peace, he was leading for vengeance. "I don't want surrender," he said in one broadcast. "I want your bones piled so high they block your own suns." That's when the Order deployed the Butchers. They were the answer to human resistance, genetically perfected, 7'5", reinforced exoskeletal armor fused with muscle tissue. They didn't sleep, they didn't eat. They didn't ask questions. They hunted. The first wave landed in Mexico City, what was left of it. They tore through resistance cells like a plague of steel. They didn't just kill, they filmed it. They wanted humanity to see, to fear. And for a moment, it worked. People stopped speaking. Broadcasts went quiet. Refugees scattered into the wilderness. Entire families swallowed poison before the Butchers got close. But one video changed everything. A cell in Kazakhstan was discovered. 6 people, trapped in a warehouse, no exit, no backup. One Butcher landed on the roof and crashed through steel like paper. Everyone thought it was over. Then the feed glitched. Sparks, screaming, then silence. The camera eventually flicked back on. The image was blurry, dusty, but clear enough. The Butcher's head was impaled on a rusted steel beam. Blood, their blood, black and thick, soaked the floor. The humans were dead, yes, but they'd killed it. No tech, no air support, just rage, desperation, and a sharpened steel pipe through its jaw. That clip went viral on every resistance net. It became a chant, painted on walls, burned into helmets. They can die. Now Earth hunted back. The Scourge reformed. Bigger, meaner, better armed. Parker began coordinating multi-continent raids from bunkers laced in lead and silence. They hit butcher drops before they landed, booby-trapped cities, lured squads into tunnels rigged with thermite, developed bacterial weapons that infected the Butcher's synthetic tissue and caused neurolock. And every time one went down, they didn't just celebrate. They displayed the body, nailed to walls, heads on spikes. A reminder. Earth wasn't prey anymore. Then Widow's teeth bit down. The Order didn't know where the strike came from. Sensors picked up seismic activity in the Indian Ocean, but it was too deep to trace. Just another tremor. Nothing special. Until 10 orbital facilities exploded simultaneously, not shot, not bombed, overloaded, from the inside. Somehow Tanaka had infected their systems. Fed their AI logic loops that caused quantum feedback, burned out their cores, triggered nuclear chain reactions. 10 order stations. Gone. 30,000 alien lives extinguished in a flash. The retaliation came swift. The Order's high command issued a burn directive. No more precision, no more selective cleansing. Just fire. From orbit, they deployed the Scorch engines, black, slow-moving clouds of nanite dust, designed to convert matter into raw fuel. First tested on barren moons, now aimed at Earth. 3 clouds, each the size of Manhattan, each heading for a major continent. Tanaka watched it happen in silence, then turned to Parker. "We can't stop them," he said. "We can't shoot them, can't outrun them." Parker stared at the screen, then spoke 2 words. "Fang Protocol." The final card, the one Brandt had never lived to use. Deep inside Widow's teeth was a weapon no human had ever tested, built from scraps of alien technology. A black orb, pulsing with energy, found inside the ruins of a crashed Order transport 2 months into the war. Scientists said it was a memory core, but not like ours. This one didn't store data, it stored emotion. The Order had used it to program synthetic empathy into AI commanders. Tanaka rewired it, then filled it with human rage, pain, suffering, betrayal, screams, gasps, mothers holding dead babies, men dying with knives in their teeth, cities burning, families torn apart. He recorded it all, then fed it into the orb. Fang Protocol didn't fire a weapon. It broadcast a feeling, a signal so powerful it bypassed language, culture, even biology. It didn't speak, it screamed. When they activated it, the pulse went out across the solar system. Not a bang, not a flash, just pure, raw, human agony beamed into the minds of every Order soldier, ship, and AI. And for the first time since the invasion, the Order hesitated. Ships froze in orbit, Scorch engines stalled, butchers dropped to their knees. Their minds flooded with memories that weren't theirs, fear, despair, the unfiltered truth of what Earth had suffered. It was too much. A third of the fleet turned around. Some self-destructed. Others opened fire on each other. The system was in chaos, and humanity didn't let it go to waste. The counterstrike was brutal. Every remaining human cell activated. Missiles launched from trucks disguised as ambulances. Snipers opened fire from church towers. Underground silos detonated. Refugees became soldiers. Children handed out bullets. And when the final Scorch engine fell from the sky, crashing into the Atlantic like a dying god, the world didn't cheer. It just breathed, for the first time in months. Earth exhaled. But it wasn't over, because now Earth had a weapon. Not just tech, not just ships, but the truth that even the gods bleed, that fear cuts both ways, that humanity, cornered, humiliated, gutted, was still standing, still fighting. And now, it was coming for blood. The signal reached them in 11 days. The Fang Protocol's scream, that raw, unfiltered broadcast of human agony, fury, and loss, didn't just disrupt the Order's fleet. It traveled far beyond Earth's system, into deep space, into the dark halls of the Council of Dominion, the ruling chamber of the Galactic Order, an ancient empire built on logic, structure, and obedience. Empires like theirs weren't supposed to feel. That's how they'd ruled for centuries. One voice, one will. But when the signal hit their minds, it tore through every protocol, every firewall, every psychic barrier. Some screamed, some wept, and one of the High Arbiters, a species bred for neutrality and emotionless judgment, bit out his own tongue and collapsed onto the polished obsidian floor. There was no misunderstanding it. Humanity wasn't just resisting. They were declaring something much worse. Parker didn't celebrate. He watched the breakdown of the Order's fleets, the scrambled transmissions of butchers turning on their own, and the burning wreckage of failed scorch engines with the same empty stare he gave his own reflection each morning. It was working. Earth was no longer being occupied. It was being avoided. That's when he knew they had reached the next phase. "We're no longer prey," he said into a secure channel to every surviving resistance leader. "We're a pathogen." The Scourge had grown. They weren't just scattered rebels anymore. They were an army, not official, not in uniform, but deadly, unified by blood and hatred, hardened by starvation and slaughter, trained in every hellhole Earth had to offer. Their motto, scrawled on walls from Brazil to Beijing, was simple: "We are the disease they can't cure." And now they wanted to spread it. The Resistance Command agreed. The only way to ensure survival now was to take the war off-world. Tanaka called it the Second Exodus, not an evacuation, not an escape, but an invasion. They had no proper ships, no navy, no trained pilots, so they did what humans always do when cornered. They stole. They hijacked abandoned Order vessels still adrift from earlier attacks, rewired control systems, reprogrammed AI to accept human voices, ripped out luxury quarters to make room for weapons, bunks, and drop pods. They didn't call them starships. They called them hounds, fast, mean, and loyal only to pain. The first hound was crewed by 10 Scourge operators, veterans of Earth's worst firefights. Their mission? Find an Order world, scout, raid, send a message. They didn't even wait for full repairs. They left orbit with fuel lines leaking and oxygen tanks half empty. They didn't care. The first target was a fringe world called Caltheron, a mining colony that supplied titanium for Order ship hulls, defended only by drones and a civilian militia. The Hound hit atmosphere at full burn, screaming fire across their sky. No demands. No introduction, just a landing, and then rage. The Scourge breached their main control tower using explosives made from repurposed Order tech and homemade napalm. They tore through defenses, slaughtered soldiers, and broadcast everything. They didn't just kill, they humiliated. One by one, they dragged Order engineers into the streets, stripped their uniforms, and forced them to kneel. Then they asked one question: "Do you remember what you did to Rio?" And then they shot them. Live feed, unfiltered, broadcast across the colony's networks, meant to be seen. At the end of it, Parker sent a message to the remaining civilians. "Your death is not required, yet. Abandon this colony, leave everything. You have one day." And they did. By the time the Order scrambled a response fleet, the Scourge were gone. But they left a crater where the main reactor used to be, and in its center, a steel stake holding the remains of the Order flag. Burned, soaked in blood. The reaction from the Order was scattered. Their empire wasn't designed to handle insurgency, let alone full-blown planetary terrorism. They ran on order, not chaos. And Earth had become chaos incarnate. For the first time, systems near Earth began seceding from the Order, not because they supported humanity, but because they were afraid of what was coming. "You tried to civilize them," said one rogue commander in a classified transmission. "You tried to contain them, but you didn't break them, and now they've become something worse." They've become like us, without the rules. Meanwhile, back on Earth, Parker prepared the next wave. The Carrion Fleet. 5 ships. Barely space-worthy, a patchwork of order wreckage, human engineering, and desperation, each one named after a city the Order had destroyed: Rio, Warsaw, Johannesburg, Chicago, Manila. They weren't just ships. They were funeral barges, each loaded with soldiers who had lost everything. Some had been children during the invasion. Others were prisoners released under one condition: fight or be thrown back into the dark. No training manuals, no medals, just one instruction: find a target, leave nothing alive. The second world they hit was different. Yarek, not a military post, a cultural archive, a sacred library planet filled with art, music, and philosophical records from a dozen species, the kind of world that humanity once might have protected. But this wasn't that kind of war. Parker gave the order himself. Burn it! The Scourge landed in drop pods. No comms, no speeches, just slaughter. The Order's scholars begged, sent surrender codes, offered access to records of galactic history. It didn't matter. They torched it all. Every building, every piece of art, every symbol of Order pride. In one broadcast, a Scourge officer stared directly into the camera, blood across her face, and said, "This is what remembering feels like." Parker watched the transmission from a concrete bunker in the Alps. His hands trembled, not from regret, but from the weight of the next decision. Tanaka entered, holding new intel, another Order world, a bigger one, a communications hub that tied 3 sectors together, guarded by 2 capital ships. Tanaka expected Parker to wait, to plan. Instead, Parker just said, "Send Widow 2. Widow 2 wasn't like the others. It wasn't fast, it wasn't pretty. It was a repurposed mining colony, a mobile asteroid with thrusters welded to its core. It moved at crawl speed, but inside, 50,000 tons of explosives, and at its heart, another emotion core. Not just pain. This one was filled with vengeance, engineered to detonate in a psychic pulse that would tear through the minds of any Order species within planetary range. Not kill them, no, just break them. Force them to feel everything Earth had felt, every scream, every burn, every betrayal. For 30 minutes before the payload detonated, the inhabitants of that world collapsed into fits of madness. Some clawed their own eyes out. Others screamed for forgiveness from species they didn't even remember conquering. And when the bomb finally went off, it shattered the crust of the planet. Turned the surface into a tomb of the mindless. The galaxy took notice. The Order began fracturing, allies defected, vassal species fled into deep space, and in the chaos, a new signal began bouncing through the cracks in the Order's dying network. A symbol, a red hand, clutching a broken crown, and 2 words: human reckoning. Back on Earth, Tanaka stood outside the ruins of the old United Nations building. Snow fell. The air smelled like dust and ozone. He lit a cigarette, took one drag, and watched a group of kids, 10, maybe 11, play with sticks and metal scraps. One of them had painted his face black and red. Another carried a bent pipe like a rifle. They weren't afraid. They were preparing. He turned to Parker. "You think we've become monsters?" Parker didn't answer for a long time. Then he looked out at the horizon, empty, scorched, and said, "No, I think we always were. They just gave us a reason. The Galactic Order wasn't just bleeding anymore. It was hemorrhaging. By the end of the 3rd month after the destruction of Caltheron and Yarek, 27 systems had declared neutrality. 5 had surrendered entirely, hoping to avoid human attention. 2 had detonated their own military stockpiles just in case. The once godlike structure that had subjugated entire civilizations was now a rotting skeleton, twitching, paranoid, and broken. But in that vacuum, something worse began to take shape. Parker saw it coming. Tanaka warned him. "Other powers are watching," Tanaka said, eyes red from lack of sleep. "They didn't help the order, but they're not going to let this keep going." Parker lit a match. Not a lighter, a match. The old kind. Said it helped him think. He stared at the flame. Let them come. They came. But not with warships, not with soldiers, not with bombs. They came as observers, the Valerie Union, a race of crystalline entities that claimed to have mapped the emotional spectrum of the known universe. Sent an envoy ship to orbit Earth. It didn't land. It didn't ask permission. It just floated, pulsing, watching. The Nelakar hive, insectoids with collective intelligence, began broadcasting their thoughts directly into open frequencies. We have not seen such sustained retaliation in 1,000 cycles. This species remembers pain like a religion. And then there were the Draylans, humanoid, older than the Order, silent for centuries, never interfered, never allied. But they had power, and when they moved, entire empires trembled. They sent a single probe to Earth's orbit. Inside it? A message, carved into the metal in perfect English. "You are becoming what you hated. Are you sure you want to keep going?" Parker read it once, didn't flinch. He handed it to Tanaka and said, "Carve this into a bullet." The scourge didn't stop. By now they had names, commanders, faces, kill counts. There was Marin, the ghost of Manila, a one-eyed scout who could infiltrate a base, slit 20 throats, and vanish before the first scream hit the air. Santos, a Brazilian ex-cop turned resistance butcher, whose team used flamethrowers on order nests and then played lullabies over the comms as the bodies cooked. Red, a girl no older than 16, who rigged a transmission satellite to play the screams of the Order's dead back into their own fleets during battle. And they all answered to one voice, Parker. To the galaxy, he was now more myth than man. To Earth, he was a symbol, not of hope, of wrath. But the Draylans weren't watching for sport. They were calculating. Their own history was full of rebellions, failed ones, civil wars, uprisings, genocides. They had seen the signs before, but not like this. Humans didn't just retaliate, they multiplied their anger. Each death made them louder, each loss made them smarter, and each mistake the Order made became a weapon in Earth's hands. It terrified the Draylans. So they made a decision. If Parker wasn't stopped now, Earth's disease of vengeance would spread to the rest of the galaxy. The Order might deserve to fall, but humanity didn't deserve to rise. It started with a storm. Over Norway, the sky tore open, not with fire, with silence. A Draylon weapon, something Earth had never seen. A gravity coil, invisible, soundless, but sharp. It sliced a 10-mile stretch of forest clean off the map. No heat, no warning, just disappearance. Then came the voice. A broadcast from Draylan Command. We do not come as allies of the Order. We come to bury your wrath before it becomes a plague. Tanaka was the first to see it as something different. They're not trying to kill us. Not yet, he told Parker. They're trying to cut off our head. You, me, scourge leadership, decapitate the movement. They're too late, Parker said. Why? Parker opened the comms logs, played 3 audio files. One was from a resistance cell in Uganda, declaring they'd launched an orbital strike with scavenged plasma torpedoes. Another from a crew in orbit of Saturn, preparing to hijack another Order vessel. The last? A child, no more than 12, broadcasting a list of alien names, targets, enemies. They didn't build a movement, Tanaka, Parker said. They built a belief. You can't decapitate that. The Draylans escalated. 3 tactical strikes, one in New Zealand, wiped out an entire weapons depot, one in Argentina, vaporized a Scourge rally point, and one in Zurich, where Tanaka was. He died on a Thursday. No pain, no warning. Just gone, like a candle snuffed out mid-sentence. Parker didn't speak for 6 hours, didn't move. When he finally opened his mouth, the men in the bunker froze. He said only 3 words. "Burn their world." The Scourge responded immediately. They didn't have intel on Draylan homeworlds, but they had rumors. One planet, hidden, shielded, ancient. Supposedly impossible to reach. They found it anyway, and they sent Widow 3. Not a ship, a payload. Inside, a memory bomb, just like Fang Protocol. But worse, this one wasn't just filled with pain. It was filled with Tanaka, his voice, his mind, his memories, his fury, every file, every word, every second of his recorded life, programmed into a psychic warhead aimed at the species that took him. It hit the outer orbit of the Draylan world. Didn't kill anyone. But it changed them. For 12 hours, every Draylan heard Tanaka's last thoughts, his final breath, his fear, his defiance, his longing for revenge, and in that echo they saw the future, their own destruction, because if one human could break them with just a memory, what would happen when Earth learned to harness millions? The Draylans retreated. Not publicly, not formally. But one by one, their ships vanished from Earth orbit. They issued no apology, made no promises. They just left. And humanity didn't thank them. They marked them as next. The rest of the galaxy had seen enough. Some species began allying with Earth, not out of respect, but out of fear. Better to kneel early than burn late. One by one, they offered ships, tech, resources. Some said it was diplomacy. Others called it what it really was, appeasement. But Earth didn't care. It didn't want rule. It wanted ruin. That winter, Parker visited the ruins of Moscow, one of the first cities hit during the early invasion, still frozen, still ash. He stood there alone. No guards, no comms, just snow. He knelt by a burned-out statue, once Lenin, now shattered beyond recognition. He reached into his coat, pulled out an old piece of metal. Tanaka's dog tag. He buried it in the ice, not for peace, but as a seed, a grave marker, a warning that even the most advanced civilization in the galaxy couldn't stop one man with a memory and a grudge. The galaxy had finally learned one thing. You don't invade Earth. You survive Earth. If you're lucky. It had been 1 year and 29 days since the sky over Siberia had cracked open, and the Galactic Order had demanded Earth's surrender. 1 year and 29 days since they'd said resistance was non-negotiable. 1 year and 29 days since Colonel Brandt had looked into the heart of extinction and said, "Then we'll make you regret asking." Now the Order was gone. Not defeated, extinct. Their fleets were in pieces, drifting between moons and asteroid belts, half cannibalized by rebel crews. Their communication hubs were gone, their archives burned. Their leaders, the few that hadn't swallowed their own toxins, were now prisoners, passed between resistance cells like trophies. And Earth? Earth was still standing, scarred, starved, radiated, nearly uninhabitable in some regions, but alive, and more dangerous than ever. Parker stood in silence on the bridge of Widow 4, the last warship Earth had launched, still smelling of rust and blood. Below him, the planet Korav burned, the final major order bastion, where the last vestiges of their war council had hidden, defended by black sky citadels and mercenary fleets. He had given no speech, no warning, no offer of surrender. He had simply said, "Glass it." And they did. It was over now, the war. The rest of the galaxy understood. They'd seen enough. Some species began wearing red bands on their limbs or antennae, symbols of neutrality, submission, or respect, depending on who you asked. Others fled into the void, abandoning colonies, trying to disappear before Earth came knocking. But Earth wasn't chasing anymore. The beast had fed. And now it was staring at its own reflection, wondering what the hell it had become. Parker returned to Earth quietly. No ceremony, no crowds. No one even knew he was back, except for the old survivors who still answered the encrypted frequencies buried beneath bunkers and concrete. He walked through the ruins of Berlin. The air stung with ash and cold. Nature had started to reclaim what war had left behind. Weeds crawling through cracked marble, crows nesting in collapsed cathedrals. He found a bench, sat down, and waited. He wasn't alone for long. A man approached, thin, worn, one arm missing. He didn't salute, just sat beside him, wordless. Another came. A woman, skin blistered from radiation, covered in tattoos that told her kill count. Then another, and another. Soon, there were 20 of them, all scattered from different units, different continents, different nightmares, all with one thing in common. They had survived. And now, they had no enemy left to kill. Parker broke the silence. "Did we win?" No one answered. He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Feels like losing with better lighting." Marin, the ghost of Manila, spoke next. "They feared us." Parker nodded. "They did. Now what?" He didn't answer right away, then finally said, "Now we figure out who we are without an enemy." But that was the problem, wasn't it? Because for a full year, humanity had become rage-given form. They'd turned their grief into gunpowder, their loss into missiles, their memory into warheads. They'd poured every ounce of their identity into not being victims again. And now, with nothing left to burn, what were they? Parker wasn't naive. He knew peace wouldn't come easily, or at all. Already there were whispers, factions forming, old grudges resurfacing. Some of the scourge had broken off, refusing to demobilize. They wanted more, not revenge. Control. The first splinter group called itself the Red Doctrine. Their belief was simple. Peace is a lie told by the weak. War is the only honest God. They began raiding order-aligned systems that had already surrendered. They burned cities, not for justice, for fun. Some of the worst atrocities ever committed during the war weren't by aliens, but by these humans, these fanatics, these fragments of the vengeance machine that had never been turned off. They weren't soldiers anymore. They were pyromaniacs with a flamethrower and no one left to stop them. Parker was dragged back into the fold. The Provisional Human Council, made of scattered resistance commanders, ex-military and desperate politicians, begged him to speak, to lead again, to unite the movement before it collapsed into tribal warfare. He said no, at first. Then they showed him a video, a group of Red Doctrine soldiers dragging alien civilians, children, from a medical tent on a surrendered world. They laughed as they forced them to dig their own graves. That night, Parker made one final broadcast. He appeared not in uniform. Not on a podium, just seated in a broken chair with the cracked skull of a butcher hanging behind him like a warning. His voice was raw, unrehearsed, human. "I never asked to lead, never wanted to be anyone's hero. I wanted revenge, and I got it. But now I see what we've built. It's not peace, it's just a different kind of plague." He leaned forward. "If you kill unarmed civilians, if you burn cities for pleasure, if you think fear is the same as respect, then you are no better than the monsters we fought." And then he said the line that would echo across every remaining signal, every wall, every memory. "If you want to keep being the villain, fine, but don't do it with our flag on your chest." Within days, The Red Doctrine split, half dissolved. Others turned against each other. Some even assassinated their own commanders to avoid being purged. Those who continued the slaughter? Parker hunted them himself, not with fleets, not with drones, with teams, old friends, survivors, ghosts of a war that refused to end. They called themselves the Last Teeth. And their job was simple: clean up what we created. By the second anniversary of the invasion, Earth was no longer just a planet. It was a name, a curse, a warning, a religion, a scar. Some species now named their children after human cities as symbols of strength. Others wouldn't even speak the word Earth aloud. In the galactic underworld, a phrase became common: "Cross me, and I'll send you to Earth." It meant death, or worse, remembrance. Parker never gave another speech, never accepted any rank. He spent the rest of his life traveling between the outer systems, rebuilding where he could, burying where he had to. Sometimes alone, sometimes with Marin, Santos, or others who still heard the drums of war in their sleep. He died 13 years later, not in battle, not by bullet. Just quietly, in a small outpost orbiting a refueling station once held by the Order. They found a message carved into the steel beside his bed. Just 5 words. "Don't let us become them." They buried him on Earth, under what was left of the old UN building, a crater now filled with weeds and rain. No statue, no parade, just a single plaque, one name, and beside it, the emblem of the scourge, the red hand, clutching the broken crown. Epilogue. 50 years passed. A new council ruled Earth, one made of soldiers and civilians alike. Strict, watchful. Unforgiving. They kept the peace. Barely. But the legacy of the war never faded. Ships still bore the scars. Children still wore dog tags like necklaces. And every year, on the anniversary of the first invasion, the whole planet paused. Not for celebration, not for mourning, but to remember what it cost, who they lost, and why Earth would never, ever bow again.